They saw a black woman in a luxury car and assumed she was a criminal. They saw her expensive dress and assumed it was bought with dirty money. But when Officer Derek Slater put his hands on Nia Baxter, ripping her gown in a shameful act of public humiliation, he didn't realize he wasn't just arresting a suspect. He was arresting the woman who signed his paychecks. He thought he was the law. He had no idea that one phone call from the back of his cruiser was about to bring the entire precinct crumbling down. Watch what happens when arrogance meets the ultimate karma. The rain had just started to slick the streets of Charleston, South Carolina, turning the asphalt into a black mirror, reflecting the neon lights of the city. It was 11:30 p.m. Nia Baxter sat behind the wheel of her pearl-white Bentley Continental, the heated leather seat a stark contrast to the miserable weather outside. Nia was tired. She had just spent 4 hours at the chaotic Hope for Tomorrow charity gala at the Wentworth Mansion. As the CEO of Baxter & Associates, one of the most ruthless corporate architecture firms on the East Coast, she was used to high pressure. But tonight was different. She wasn't wearing her usual power suit. Instead, she was draped in a custom-made silver silk evening gown that shimmered like moonlight, valued at over $5,000. She adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her own exhausted eyes. She just wanted to get home to her estate in the quiet, affluent district of Daniel Island. But as she turned onto the connector, the darkness behind her exploded with red and blue lights. The siren whooped once, short, aggressive. Nia sighed, her pulse quickening slightly. She checked her speedometer. She was doing 45 in a 50 zone. She signaled, pulling the heavy luxury car onto the shoulder of the highway. "Okay, Nia. Keep it cool. Just a routine check," she whispered to herself, placing her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. In her side mirror, she saw the patrol car door open. A figure stepped out, clad in a dark rain slicker and the stiff brim of a trooper hat. He walked with a swagger that Nia recognized instantly. It was the walk of a man who was looking for a fight. He didn't approach the window immediately. He circled the Bentley first, shining his heavy Maglite flashlight into the back seat, then lingering on the tires, and finally, the license plate. Finally, he tapped the glass with the heavy end of the flashlight. Thwack! Thwack! Nia lowered the window. The smell of rain and ozone filled the cabin. "License and registration," the officer commanded. He didn't say, "Good evening." He didn't explain the stop. His badge read, Officer D. Slater. He was young, thick-necked, with a buzz cut and eyes that looked cold and bored. "Good evening, officer," Nia said, her voice steady, cultivated in boardrooms where she regularly dismantled multi-million-dollar deals. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" "I said license and registration," Slater barked, leaning in closer. His eyes raked over the interior of the car, landing on Nia's silver dress. A smirk curled his lip. "Nice car. Whose is it? Your boyfriend's?" Nia stiffened. "The car belongs to me, officer. My name is on the registration." "Sure it is," Slater muttered. He snatched the documents from her hand. He walked back to his cruiser, leaving Nia sitting in the rain with her window down. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nia watched in the mirror. Slater was just sitting in his car. He wasn't on the radio. He was on his personal cell phone, laughing. He was making her wait. It was a power play, pure and simple. Finally, Slater returned. This time, another patrol car had pulled up behind him. A second officer, older, with a grey mustache and a name tag reading SGT. Reynolds stepped out. "Step out of the vehicle," Slater ordered, opening Nora's door before she could unlock it herself. "Excuse me?" Nia asked, clutching the steering wheel. "Officer, it's pouring rain. I'm wearing an evening gown. Why do I need to step out?" "We smell marijuana," Slater lied. He said it with such casual ease that it took Nia's breath away. "We have probable cause to search the vehicle. Get out, now." "I don't smoke," Nia said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "And there is no smell of marijuana in this car. You are making a mistake, Officer Slater." "Out!" Slater grabbed her upper arm. His grip was bruising. He yanked her from the warmth of the Bentley into the cold, driving rain. Her silver heels slipped on the wet asphalt. She stumbled, barely catching herself on the doorframe. The rain instantly soaked her hair and the delicate silk of her dress. "Turn around, hands on the hood," Slater shouted. "This is harassment," Nia stated loud enough for the dashcam to hear. "I am Nia Baxter. I demand to know—" "I don't care if you're the Queen of Sheba," Slater hissed in her ear, shoving her face first onto the cold metal of her car hood. "In my town, you do what you're told." The rain was relentless, plastering the expensive silk to Nia's skin. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from a rage that was boiling deep in her gut. She could feel the heat of the engine through the hood against her cheek. Sergeant Reynolds stood by, watching. He didn't intervene. He leaned against his cruiser, chewing gum, looking bored. He had seen Slater do this 12 times. It was just a game to them. "Spread your legs," Slater commanded. He kicked her right ankle, forcing her feet apart. He began the pat-down. It was aggressive, intrusive. His hands moved up her legs, lingering too long, pressing too hard. It wasn't a search for weapons. It was a search for submission. "Watch your hands," Nia warned, her voice trembling with fury. "Stop resisting!" Slater yelled for the benefit of the camera, though Nia hadn't moved a muscle. Then he reached the bodice of her gown. The dress was a custom design, held together by a delicate clasp and zipper at the back. As Slater roughly spun her around to handcuff her, his thumb hooked into the back of the delicate fabric. Instead of untangling it, he yanked. "Ripe." The sound was sickeningly loud over the drumming rain. The silk tore from the shoulder blade down to her waist. The dress fell open, exposing her lace undergarments and the dark skin of her back to the freezing rain and the harsh glare of the headlights. Nia gasped, instinctively trying to cover herself, but Slater already had one wrist in a cuff. He wrenched her arm back. "Stop! You tore my dress!" she screamed, the humiliation finally piercing her composure. "You ripped my dress off!" "Wardrobe malfunction," Slater laughed, tightening the cuff until it bit into her skin. "Maybe you shouldn't dress like a hooker if you don't want attention." He spun her around. Nia stood there, half naked on the side of the highway, the ruined $5,000 gown hanging off her body like a rag. Cars were passing by, slowing down to gawk. She saw a phone flash from a passing window. Someone was recording. "You are going to regret this," Nia said. She didn't scream it. She said it with a terrifying calm, her eyes locked onto Slater's. "Officer Derek Slater, badge number 4922. I'm going to remember that." "Is that a threat?" Slater got in her face, his spit hitting her cheek. "Assaulting an officer, that's another charge." "It's not a threat," Nia replied, water dripping from her nose. "It's a promise." He shoved her toward the back of the cruiser. He didn't offer to cover her up. He didn't let her grab her coat from the Bentley. He shoved her into the hard plastic seat of the cage, the torn dress leaving her exposed to the stagnant, cold air of the police car. As he slammed the door, Nia watched through the wire mesh. Slater and Reynolds were high-fiving. Slater was laughing, mimicking the way she had stumbled. They began tossing the contents of her Bentley onto the wet road, her purse, her architectural blueprints, her portfolio. They thought they had broken her. They thought she was just another woman they could bully into a plea deal for a fake drug charge. Nia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't crying. Tears were for people who had no options. Nia Baxter had options. She waited until Slater got into the driver's seat. He smelled like stale coffee and arrogance. "You're going to the Stratford Precinct," Slater said, looking at her in the rearview mirror. "Hope you like bologna sandwiches." "Officer Slater," Nia said clearly, "I have one question." "Yeah? What? Is your body camera on?" Slater tapped his chest. "Always. We love capturing the moment criminals get caught." "Good," Nia whispered, leaning her head back against the plastic. "Keep it running. You're going to want to save this footage for your unemployment hearing." The Stratford Precinct was a block of grey concrete that smelled of bleach and despair. Slater paraded Nia through the front desk area. Her dress was still torn, held up only by her own hand, clutching the fabric across her chest. The desk sergeant, a woman named O'Malley, looked up. Her eyes widened when she saw Nia's state. "Slater, what the hell?" O'Malley asked, looking at the torn gown. "Did you wrestle a bear?" "She resisted," Slater shrugged. "Had to subdue her. Found suspicious paraphernalia in the car. We're booking her for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and suspicion of possession." "Suspicion?" Nia cut in. "You didn't find anything because there was nothing to find." "Quiet!" Slater slammed his hand on the booking counter. They took her mug shot. They took her fingerprints. Throughout it all, Nia remained silent. She refused to answer their questions. She refused to sign the paperwork, admitting to the charges. They put her in a holding cell. It was crowded. 2 other women sat on the bench. One was asleep. The other, a young girl with dyed blue hair, looked at Nia with sympathy. "Damn," the girl whispered. "They really did a number on you. Here." She took off her own denim jacket and handed it to Nia. "Thank you," Nia said softly, wrapping the jacket around her ruined dress. It was the first act of kindness she had experienced in 2 hours. An hour passed, then 2. Slater walked by the cell occasionally, smirking, tapping on the bars. He was enjoying this. He thought he had won. Finally, Sergeant O'Malley came to the cell door. "Baxter, you get your phone call. Make it quick." Nia stood up. She walked to the wall-mounted phone in the hallway. Slater was leaning against the wall nearby, sipping a soda, listening. "Calling your pimp?" Slater heckled. Nia ignored him. She dialed a number from memory. It wasn't a local bondsman. It wasn't a family member. It was a private number that very few people possessed. The phone rang twice. "This is Harrison," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Arthur," Nia said. Her voice was steady, but the authority in it was undeniable. "It's Nia." There was a pause on the line. The tone of the voice on the other end shifted instantly from professional to alarmed. "Nia, it's 2:00 a.m. Why are you calling me on this line? Is everything all right?" "I'm at the Stratford Precinct," Nia said, looking directly at Slater. "I have been arrested by Officer Derek Slater and Sergeant Reynolds. They pulled me over without cause. They assaulted me. Officer Slater ripped my clothes off in the middle of the highway. I am currently sitting in a cell, half naked, falsely accused of drug possession." Silence. A heavy, terrifying silence hung on the line. "Arthur," Nia continued, "I want you to come down here, and I want you to bring the governor." Slater, who had been chuckling, suddenly stopped. He frowned. "Who is she talking to?" he muttered to O'Malley. "I'm on my way," the voice on the phone said. It was Arthur Harrison, the State Attorney General. "And Nia?" "Yes?" "Don't say another word to them. I'm bringing the cavalry." Nia hung up the phone. She turned to Slater. The smirk was gone from his face, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Who was that?" Slater asked, stepping closer. "Who's Arthur?" Nia sat back down on the bench and smoothed the denim jacket over her lap. She looked up at him with a small, icy smile. "That," she said, was the man who is going to put you in prison." The clock on the precinct wall ticked loudly. 2:45 a.m. The graveyard shift at Stratford Precinct was usually quiet, punctuated only by the occasional drunk tank admission or radio chatter. Officer Derek Slater was sitting at his desk, feet up, recounting the arrest to a rookie officer, embellishing the story to make Naya sound like a violent maniac. "I'm telling you, man," Slater laughed, taking a bite of a donut. "She was clawing at me. Had to show her who's boss. These rich types, they think the rules don't apply to them." Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the front of the station didn't just open. They were thrown wide. A blast of cold, wet air swept into the room, followed by the clicking of expensive dress shoes on the linoleum floor. The room fell silent. It wasn't just one man. It was a phalanx. Leading the pack was Arthur Harrison, the state attorney general. He was a tall man with silver hair and a terrifying reputation for destroying careers. He was wearing a trench coat over a tuxedo, clearly having come from the same gala Naya had attended. Flanking him were 3 other men in sharp, dark suits, senior partners from Harrison, Wolfe, and Sterling, the most expensive criminal defense firm in the state. But the person walking a step behind Harrison made Slater's blood run cold. It was Chief of Police Thomas Miller. He wasn't in uniform. He was in sweatpants and a windbreaker, looking disheveled, sleep-deprived, and absolutely furious. "Attention!" Sergeant O'Malley shouted from the front desk, scrambling to stand up. Every officer in the room jumped to their feet. Slater dropped his legs from the desk so fast he nearly tipped his chair over. "Where is she?" Arthur Harrison didn't say hello. He didn't introduce himself. He barked the question at the room at large, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Who?" Slater stammered, stepping forward, trying to regain some of his earlier bravado. "Sir, you can't just barge in here." Chief Miller stepped forward, getting inches from Slater's face. "Shut your mouth, Slater. If you speak one more word without permission, I will rip that badge off your chest myself. Where is Miss Baxter?" Slater swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Holding cell 2, Chief." "But sir, she—" "I said shut up!" Miller roared. Harrison turned to O'Malley. "Open it, now." O'Malley fumbled for the keys, her hands shaking. She led the group down the hallway to the holding cells. When the heavy steel door slid open, the sight that greeted them sucked the air out of the room. Naya was sitting on the hard bench, shivering under the thin denim jacket the stranger had lent her. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was matted with rain, and her $5,000 dress lay in tatters around her waist. She looked up. Her expression wasn't one of relief. It was one of cold, calculating judgment. "Arthur," Naya said calmly, standing up. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen holding court in a dungeon. "My God, Naya," Arthur Harrison whispered, rushing forward to wrap his own trench coat around her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "Bruising on my wrists and back," Nia replied, her voice flat. "And I believe I have a mild concussion from being slammed into the hood of my car." Chief Miller looked at Nia, then at the torn dress, then back at Slater, who was lurking in the hallway. The chief's face went a shade of purple that was dangerous for a man of his age. "Get her out of there," Miller ordered. "Get her into the conference room. Now." "I'm not going anywhere until my belongings are returned," Naya said, not moving. "And I want the booking footage preserved, and the dash cam footage, and Officer Slater's body camera footage. If 1 second of tape goes missing, Chief Miller, I will sue this city until the sidewalks are sold for scrap." "It's already done, Miss Baxter," Arthur Harrison assured her. "I have a court order signed by Judge Prentice 10 minutes ago. We are seizing all digital evidence." Nia stepped out of the cell. She walked past Slater. She didn't look at him. She looked through him. Slater turned to his sergeant, Reynolds. "Sarge, what's going on? Who is she?" Reynolds, who had been pale since the Attorney General walked in, whispered back, "You idiot! You didn't run her name properly. That's Nia Baxter. She's the lead architect for the new City Justice Center. She's personal friends with the governor, and—" Reynolds swallowed. "She sits on the Civilian Oversight Board." Slater felt the floor drop out from under him. He hadn't just arrested a rich woman. He had arrested the woman who was in charge of auditing police misconduct. The conference room was tense. Nia sat at the head of the table, wrapped in the Attorney General's coat, drinking a cup of hot tea that a terrified rookie had fetched for her. Across from her sat Chief Miller, Captain Walsh, the precinct commander who had just arrived, looking like he was about to vomit, and Arthur Harrison. Slater and Reynolds were standing against the wall, stripped of their gun belts, looking like schoolboys in the principal's office. "Let's review the probable cause," Arthur Harrison said, opening a file folder. Officer Slater stated he smelled marijuana. "Nia, do you smoke?" "I have severe asthma," Nia said efficiently. "I have never smoked a day in my life. A drug test will confirm that immediately, which I am happy to take right now." "We found—" "Residue," Slater tried to interject, his voice cracking. "In the console." "We checked the evidence bag," Captain Walsh cut in, glaring at Slater. "It was lint. It was pocket lint, Slater. You booked pocket lint as narcotics." "The field test was inconclusive," Slater argued. "The field test wasn't even performed." Harrison slammed his hand on the table. "We have the logs. You logged the evidence after you found out who she was." "And the dress?" Chief Miller asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Explain the dress, Slater." "She resisted," Slater lied. "She was thrashing. It caught on the handcuffs." Nia set her tea down. "That is a lie." She reached into her purse, which had been returned to her. She pulled out her smartphone. "My Bentley," Nia said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "is a 2025 Continental GT. It is equipped with a 360-degree Sentry security system. It records everything that happens within 5 feet of the vehicle when the engine is off or when the proximity alarm is triggered. It uploads directly to the cloud." Slater went white. Nia tapped the screen and turned the phone around. The video played. The quality was crystal clear, even in the rain. On the screen, everyone watched as Nia stood perfectly still, hands on the hood. They saw Slater aggressively kick her legs apart. They heard him make the comment about her dressing like a hooker. And then, in 4K resolution, they saw him deliberately hook his thumb into the back of her dress and yank it downwards with force. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of sexual humiliation. The room was silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the window outside, a perfect echo of the video. Chief Miller stood up slowly. He walked over to the monitor and watched the replay. He watched Slater high-five Reynolds afterwards. Miller turned to Slater. The chief's eyes were dead. "You didn't just violate policy," Miller said softly. "You committed sexual assault under the color of authority. You falsified a police report. You kidnapped a citizen." "Chief, I—" Slater started. "Badge," Miller said. "Sir? Give me your badge, now!" The scream tore the throat out of the chief. With trembling hands, Slater unpinned the badge, number 492, from his uniform shirt. He handed it to the chief. "And yours," Miller said to Reynolds. "Chief, I didn't touch her," Reynolds protested. "You watched," Miller spat. "You watched a junior officer assault a woman, and you chewed gum. Give it to me." Nia watched the badges hit the table. The metallic clack was the most satisfying sound she had heard all night. "Am I free to go?" Nia asked, standing up. "Miss Baxter," Captain Walsh said, sweating. We are deeply sorry. We will drop all charges immediately. We hope we can resolve this quietly." Nia paused at the door. She looked back at the room full of powerful men who were suddenly afraid of her. Quietly? Nia laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Gentlemen, you seem to forget who I am. I don't do quiet. I build skyscrapers. I change skylines." She turned to Arthur. "Arthur, did you check social media?" Arthur Harrison smiled, a shark-like grin. "Trending topic number 1 in the state, Nia. Apparently, a young woman passing by live-streamed the whole thing on TikTok. 2 million views in 3 hours. CNN is setting up a van outside right now." Nia looked at Slater, who was slumped against the wall, head in his hands. "You wanted an audience, Officer Slater," Nia said. "Now you have the whole world watching." The fallout didn't begin with a whisper. It began with a roar that shook the foundations of the city. By 6:00 a.m., the dashcam footage and the bystander's cell phone video had merged into a singular, viral entity. It was trending globally on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, under the hashtag #RightDignityDenied. The contrast was visually irresistible to the algorithm. Nia Baxter, standing tall and elegant in the driving rain, and Officer Derek Slater, sneering and vicious, ripping the silk from her back. Nia didn't go home to hide. She didn't retreat to her estate on Daniel Island to weep. Instead, she went straight to her headquarters at Baxter and Associates. She showered in her private executive suite, washed the rain and the humiliation from her skin, and dressed in a suit of sharp, architectural white, a color chosen specifically to symbolize innocence and blinding truth. She stood at the window of her 40-story office, looking down at the city she had helped build. "They are calling for a statement, Miss Baxter," her assistant said, standing in the doorway with a trembling tablet. "CNN, BBC, Fox, everyone." "Not yet," Nia said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Let them wait. Let the anger ferment. Where is Arthur?" "He's executing the financial maneuver now." The first blow of karma didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened at a 7-Eleven on the corner of 4th and Main. Derek Slater had been released pending the internal investigation, a standard procedure that usually meant a paid vacation. He walked into the convenience store, cap pulled low, trying to buy a pack of cigarettes and a Gatorade. He felt untouchable. He had the union behind him. He had the blue wall of silence. He threw his debit card on the counter. The cashier, a teenage boy who was watching a video on his phone, the video, looked up. He looked at the screen, then at Slater. His eyes widened. Slater tapped the card machine. "Beep. Declined." "Try it again," Slater grunted. "Chip is dirty." "Beep. Declined. Contact issuer." "It ain't the chip, man," the cashier said, his voice rising. "It says contact issuer. You broke?" "I have 50 grand in that account," Slater snapped. He pulled out his phone to check his banking app. "Access denied. Account frozen. Pending federal audit." Slater froze. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He banked with First Union, the massive regional bank that handled all municipal payrolls. What Slater didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Nia Baxter sat on the board of directors for First Union. And at 8 a.m. that morning, the board had convened an emergency meeting. They had invoked the Morality and Federal Risk Clause, because Nia's legal team had flagged Slater as a liability involving money laundering suspicion related to the sudden disappearance of Nia's expensive jewelry from the evidence locker, a calculated lie by Arthur to trigger the freeze. The bank locked him out. He couldn't buy food. He couldn't pay his mortgage. He couldn't even buy gas to get home. "Hey," a customer shouted from the back of the store. "That's him. That's the cop who stripped that lady." Slater abandoned the Gatorade and ran out of the store, the jeers of the public chasing him to his car. But when he turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. His car was a lease. The leasing company, owned by a subsidiary of First Union, had remotely disabled the ignition due to a breach of contract. He was stranded, penniless, and the sharks were circling. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was toxic. Chief Thomas Miller was in his office, shredding documents. But the door flew open, and Arthur Harrison walked in, followed by 2 federal agents in FBI windbreakers. "Step away from the shredder, Thomas," Arthur said pleasantly. "You have no jurisdiction here, Harrison," the chief shouted, though his face was grey. "Actually, we do," Arthur replied, dropping a thick file onto the desk. "We aren't just suing for excessive force. We are suing for a pattern of racketeering. We found the logs, Thomas. We know about the confiscated cash from drug busts that never made it to the evidence locker. Naya's team of forensic accountants has been digging through your public records for 6 hours. They're very fast." The chief slumped into his chair. The blue wall wasn't just cracking, it was being bulldozed. "Give us Slater," Arthur said. "And maybe, just maybe, you keep your pension." An hour later, the visual that the world was waiting for finally arrived. 2 internal affairs officers, men who hated Slater for giving the badge a bad name, marched him out of his own precinct. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was in sweatpants and a dirty t-shirt. His hands were cuffed behind his back, tight. Naya was there. She stood across the street, flanked by Arthur and a wall of press. She didn't scream. She didn't hold a sign. She just watched. As Slater was shoved into the back of the transport van, he looked up and locked eyes with her. He saw no mercy in her gaze. He saw only the terrifying calculation of a woman who had the resources to burn his life to the ground. The arraignment took place the next morning at the City Justice Center. Ironically, a building Nia had designed. The air conditioning was set to freezing. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken by activists, reporters, and citizens. The prosecutor was District Attorney Frank Sterling, a man with political ambitions who knew exactly which way the wind was blowing. He wasn't going to protect a bad cop. He was going to sacrifice him to save his career. "Docket number 7742, the bailiff announced. The People versus Derek Slater. Charges: aggravated sexual battery, deprivation of civil rights, filing a false report, and grand larceny." Slater stood in the box. His lawyer was a public defender named Mr. Gorski, a tired man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Slater's union lawyer had refused to represent him, citing the gross misconduct clause. The judge entered. It was Judge William Holloway. The courtroom went silent. Judge Holloway was known as Hard Time Holloway. He was a former Marine who despised bullies. He adjusted his spectacles and looked down at Slater like he was something he had scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Holloway rumbled. "Bail recommendation?" "Your Honor," Frank Sterling boomed, gesturing to the packed gallery. "The defendant is a flight risk. He has just lost his employment. He has lost his assets. And frankly, for his own safety, he cannot be on the streets. The People request bail be denied or set at $1 million. $1 million? Slater shrieked, forgetting protocol. "I'm a police officer. You can't do this." "You were a police officer," Judge Holloway corrected, his voice slicing through the air. "Now, Mr. Slater, you are a citizen accused of a heinous act." I watched the video. I saw a man who thought the law was a weapon he could wield for his own amusement. Holloway leaned forward. "You humiliated a woman because you thought she was powerless. You thought she was nobody. You failed to realize that in this country, the law protects the nobodies just as much as the somebodies. And when you tear a dress off a citizen, You tear the fabric of the trust this community places in this court. The gavel raised. Bail is set at $750,000. Cash only. No bondsman. Slater's knees buckled. He grabbed the railing to stop from collapsing. That amount was impossible. It was a life sentence before the trial had even started. "Remand the defendant to the county jail," Holloway ordered. "And warden?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Keep him in general population. Let him see who he's been locking up all these years." "Objection!" Gorski cried weakly. "Protective custody is required for law enforcement." "Denied," Holloway said, slamming the gavel. "If he's innocent, he has nothing to fear. Next case." As the bailiffs grabbed Slater by the arms, dragging him toward the side door that led to the cells, he looked back one last time. Nia was sitting in the front row. She wasn't smiling. Smiling was too emotional. She simply picked up her crocodile skin purse, checked her diamond watch, and stood up to leave. She didn't even look at him. He was already gone. He was already a ghost. Nia walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind her, sealing Slater's fate. Outside, the sun was shining, and her driver was waiting. "Where to, Miss Baxter?" the driver asked as she slid into the back of the new Bentley. "The bank," Nia said, opening a file on her tablet. "I believe the police union's mortgage contract is up for renewal. I think it's time we adjusted the interest rates." The transition from Officer Derek Slater to inmate Ilolo 982 didn't happen all at once. It happened in agonizingly slow increments, stripping away his humanity layer by layer, just as he had stripped away Nia's dignity on the roadside. The county detention center was a brutalist architecture of despair: concrete floors, steel toilets, and air that smelled perpetually of industrial disinfectant and unwashed bodies. Because of his former status as a police officer, Slater was denied the luxury of general population. The warden, a no-nonsense woman named Warden Hayes, who had been appointed by the governor specifically to clean up the facility, placed Slater in administrative segregation. ADSEG was a fancy word for a cage. Slater spent 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. There was no window. There was only a thin slit in the steel door. He had no TV, no radio, just the hum of the ventilation system and the terrifying screams of inmates echoing off the block walls at night. For the first week, Slater paced. He muttered to himself. He practiced what he would say to the Internal Affairs Board. He convinced himself this was a mistake, a political stunt that would blow over once the news cycle moved on to the next tragedy. Then came the visitation. On the 10th day, the guard, a hulking man named Officer Washington, whom Slater had once mocked for being too soft on suspects, tapped on the glass. "Lawyer?" Slater asked, his voice rasping from disuse. "No," Washington said, his face impassive. "Your wife." Slater's heart leapt. Linda. She would stand by him. She knew he was a good cop. She would bring him news that the union was rallying, that a defense fund had been set up. He was shackled, waist and ankles, and shuffled down the hallway to the visitation booths. He sat on the metal stool, the cold seeping through his thin orange jumpsuit. Linda was on the other side of the thick plexiglass, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't looking at him with longing. She was looking at him with the same expression one might look at a dead rat in the kitchen. She picked up the phone. Slater scrambled to pick up his. "Linda, baby, thank God," Slater stammered. "You have to get hold of Mike in the union. Tell him they're treating me like an animal. Tell him." "I filed the papers this morning, Derek," Linda said. Her voice was tinny through the receiver, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. Slater blinked. "What?" "Divorce papers," she clarified, and a restraining order. I'm taking the kids to my sister's in Ohio." "Linda, no, you can't. I'm going to beat this. It's just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Linda laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Derek, I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. I saw how you looked at her. I saw how you touched her. You think I don't know that look? You used to look at me like that when you were angry, but I never thought you'd do it to a stranger." "It was procedure!" Slater yelled, slamming his fist against the glass. "She was resisting. She was standing still," Linda screamed back. "And now we have nothing. The bank foreclosed on the house yesterday. Do you know who bought the debt, Derek? Do you know why they called the loan immediately?" Slater went cold. "Who?" "Some holding company called Phoenix Arch. They bought the mortgage note from the bank and exercised the criminal conduct clause to foreclose immediately. We have 3 days to vacate." Phoenix Arch. Slater knew that name. He had seen it on the architectural blueprints Nia Baxter had in her car that night, the ones he had thrown into the rain. It was her shell company. Nia hadn't just gotten him fired. She had literally bought the roof over his head and was kicking him out. "Don't call me," Linda said, hanging up the phone. She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked away without looking back. Slater sat there, holding the dead receiver, watching his life walk out the door. The trial, when it finally arrived 4 months later, was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Arthur Harrison and the State Attorney General's office didn't just want a conviction. They wanted a public execution of the corrupt cop archetype. Nia attended every single day. She sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. She wore a different color every day: emerald green, royal blue, crimson red. She was vibrant, alive, and powerful, a stark contrast to Slater, who had lost 30 pounds and looked grey and shrunken in his ill-fitting suit. The prosecution didn't just play the video, they brought in character witnesses. They brought in 3 other women. Women Slater had pulled over in the last 2 years. Women who had been too afraid to file complaints until they saw Nia stand up. One by one, they took the stand. He made me empty my purse in the rain. He called me names. He touched my hair. The blue wall of silence crumbled. Sergeant Reynolds, desperate to save his own pension, testified against Slater in exchange for immunity. Derek told me he was going to teach her a lesson, Reynolds said to the jury, refusing to look at Slater. He said she was driving too nice a car for one of them. He decided to arrest her before he even got out of the cruiser. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood up. In the matter of the People versus Derek Slater, on the count of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of deprivation of civil rights, guilty. On the count of official misconduct, guilty. Slater closed his eyes. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was his public defender. "Don't say anything," the lawyer whispered. "It's over." But the true climax wasn't the verdict. It was the sentencing hearing 3 days later. Nia Baxter took the stand to give her victim impact statement. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "Officer Slater ripped my dress," Nia began, her voice steady, magnified by the microphone. "It was a piece of silk. It was expensive, yes. But it was just fabric. It can be replaced." She paused, looking directly at Slater. But what he tried to tear away that night was my autonomy. He wanted me to feel small so he could feel big. He wanted to remind me that in his world, a badge gives him the right to own my body for that moment. She turned to Judge Holloway. "Your Honor, there are thousands of Derek Slaters out there. They are watching this courtroom today. They are waiting to see if the badge is a shield that protects them from consequences. I am asking you to show them that it is not. I am asking you to strip him of the one thing he used against me. His power. Judge Holloway nodded slowly. He adjusted his robes and looked down at Slater. Derek Slater, you have disgraced your uniform. You have betrayed your oath, and you have terrorized this community. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison. You will not be eligible for parole for at least 12 years. 15 years. Slater gasped. It was a death sentence for a cop. Furthermore, Holloway continued, I am ordering that your pension be liquidated and awarded to the victim as restitution for emotional damages and legal fees. Slater was hauled away, his legs dragging on the floor, weeping openly. As he passed Naya, she didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched him disappear through the side door, her face a mask of absolute calm. Karma, however, is not just about punishment. It is about balance. And for Nia, balance meant erasure. 6 months after the sentencing, the city council, facing bankruptcy due to the massive lawsuits Naya's team had filed, made a desperate decision. They needed cash. They needed to settle. Nia made them an offer. She would drop the civil lawsuit against the city, saving them roughly $20 million in exchange for one thing, the deed to the Stratford Precinct property. The city agreed instantly. It was a cold, bright Tuesday in November when the demolition crew arrived. The Stratford Precinct, an ugly block of grey concrete that had stood for 40 years, was wrapped in safety netting and wiring. A massive crowd had gathered. The media was there, of course, but so were the locals. People from the neighborhood who used to cross the street to avoid walking in front of the station now stood right at the barricades, cheering. Nia stood on a raised platform. Next to her was Chloe, the young woman who had given her the denim jacket in the holding cell that night. Chloe was no longer the scared girl with blue hair. She was now the director of community outreach for Baxter and Associates. They told us to respect the law, Nia said into the microphone, addressing the sea of faces. But respect is earned. When this building stood, it cast a shadow over this neighborhood. It was a place where people went in and came out broken. She held up a small, remote detonator. Today, we bring the light back. Nia handed the detonator to Chloe. You do the honors. Chloe's hands shook slightly. She looked at the building where she had been falsely processed, where she had been mocked. She looked at Nia, who nodded encouragingly. For all of us, Chloe whispered. She pressed the button. Boom! The sound was a physical blow to the chest. A series of rapid-fire cracks echoed like gunfire, and then the support pillars gave way. The Stratford Precinct, the kingdom where Derek Slater had ruled like a tyrant, buckled. The roof collapsed inward. The walls folded like wet cardboard. In 10 seconds, it was gone. A massive cloud of dust rose into the air, obscuring the sun for a moment before the wind caught it and swept it away. Where the station had stood, there was now only a pile of rubble and rebar. The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a primal roar of relief. A reporter from Channel 5 thrust a microphone toward Nia. Miss Baxter, now that the precinct is gone, what are your plans for the land? Another office tower? A luxury condo? Nia took off her sunglasses. She looked at the empty space, her architect's eye already visualizing the steel and glass structure that would rise from the ashes. No, Nia said firmly. We are building the Baxter Chloe Legal Aid and Community Center. It will provide free legal representation to anyone wrongfully accused by the state. It will have a library, a job training center, and a 24-hour safe haven for women. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. And the lobby? The lobby will have a glass floor. Underneath the glass, We are going to leave the rubble of the old holding cells visible. We will walk over their history to build our future. In a federal penitentiary 3 states away, inmate 0982 was mopping the floor of the cafeteria. It was grueling, back-breaking work. A news program was playing on the TV mounted high in the corner of the room. And finally tonight, the news anchor said, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Legal Aid Center in Charleston took place today. The stunning glass building, designed by renowned architect Nia Baxter, has already been hailed as a masterpiece of modern design and social justice. Slater stopped mopping. He looked up at the screen. There she was, Nia Baxter, cutting a red ribbon with giant golden scissors. She looked radiant. Beside her stood the mayor, the governor, and a dozen other people Slater had once thought he could intimidate. The camera panned to the plaque on the front of the building. It read, "Justice is not given. It is built," in honor of those who stood tall when they were told to kneel. "Hey, 0982, a guard shouted, banging his baton on the table. "Stop staring at the TV and finish the floor. You miss a spot and you lose yard privileges." Slater looked at the guard. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say, "Do you know who I used to be?" But he didn't. He looked back at the screen one last time, saw Nia laughing as she walked into her beautiful, shining building, and looked back down at his bucket of dirty water. "Yes, sir," Slater whispered. He dipped the mop into the grey water and kept cleaning. Nia Baxter proved that the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't violence. It's success. She didn't just defeat the man who tried to humiliate her. She dismantled the entire system that protected him. Derek Slater lost everything: his badge, his family, his freedom, and his pride. Because he underestimated the woman in the passenger seat. He thought he was breaking her, but he was only giving her the blueprints to build something better. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Arrogant power is fragile, but dignity, once claimed, is unbreakable. This story sends chills down my spine every time. Seeing Slater scrubbing floors while Nia builds a sanctuary for justice, that is the definition of the ultimate karma. But what do you think? Did 15 years in prison fit the crime, or did Slater get off easy for the trauma he caused? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served ice cold, please smash that like button. It helps us bring more of these stories to light. And make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell right now, so you never miss a new episode. We have a crazy story coming up next week about a landlord who tried to evict a single mum and ended up losing his entire building. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay kind and stay safe.